Now, seeds are the key for all habitat needs, and this is a more harvesting technology developed by William Eyre and Sons, and this is just giving you a real look at the future before I deal with the basic principles of problems and what we need to start with. Heather seed harvesting. It's a track vehicle, cut a bar, blowing the seeds through that cyclone. Cotton grass seed harvesting. One of the wonders of what we can now do with mechanisation. Here, sheep sorrel harvesting, and there's the sheep sorrel plant on the right, and when it's mature it can be harvested for the seed. The champia grown after bracken, and the picture of the plant. With the seeds, anything can be done anyway. This is interesting. I asked Jeff what this machine was, and he explained that he was mowing and collecting seeds with an early seed harvest adaptation based on a garden lawnmower, and changing rotors to brushes and adding dual wheels. And the air sock allowed vacuum to suck up the various seeds from the mower. And here you have a four-wheel drive JCB type truck where you can either spray or seed, and lovely views of the Peak District. This is the new Toad seed spreader, so even the smallest farmer or smallest operation can be involved in this marvellous work on the uplands. They're just the different types of plants that can be seeded, various growing varieties. Next key point, we've been spending a lot of time looking at habitat, how we improve habitat for wildlife and food for animals. The quality of food is very important, and the comparative welfare is dependent mainly on the quality of that food. And that's the difference between profit and loss. The commoners are always allowed to make profit by what went into the mouths of their animals. And this slide shows the worst of shorthorns and best of shorthorns at 28 months. There is an idea that conservation grazing, you just turn animals out and that's it. It's nonsense. Animals have to be well fed for the whole thing to be viable and sensible, and they've got to be looked after. Our upland hardy breeds need less looking after, our sheep need less looking after, but there's always a management element, and anybody who talks about extensive as opposed to intensive has never run a farm. Everything on the farm and the uplands is intensive in one way or another. Dairy milk yields depend on an adequate supply of water. You find your cows don't get water for a day, you immediately see a big drop in your milk yield. I did a tour of the American dairy industry, and I saw cows being beautifully looked after and fed in the barns on the East Coast with wonderful alfalfa hay, producing 4,000 gallons of milk a year, when the average yield for dairy cows in Britain in 1971 was something like 1,000 gallons. So feeding quality food and giving the animals wonderful attention, they gave the milk without stress. This is King Seed's enhanced wild bird seed mix. They've been designed to create increased cover benefits, another cover for wildlife, in addition to providing a food source from autumn planting, and has the potential to last several years. You'll see more and more of this along the headlands of fields, the so-called conservation strips, where we're planting all kinds of plants which will help pollinators, etc. It's all part of the greening arrangements, but it's no point having all these extra species if they're going to be eaten. In other words, the predation issue is the major factor. The uplands also needs carefully managed grips and ponds. I've used this diagram because I thought it's an old diagram, very interesting. You can see a stock drinking area there, which wouldn't be allowed today, but it was a central part of providing, if you like, dung and urine for the fish and all the insects in the pond. They've got to live on food somehow, and in the same way that the cowpat is so valuable to so many insects, if dung is dropped in the pond or a river, in reality it sends the wildlife in ecstasy. This is the diagram from countryside management publications in Northern Ireland, and you can see the various features with an island, floating vegetation, large areas of shallow water, and on the northern side of the pond some shelter. But this must always be included where there is a really good springhead site, and then you're going to have the water for most of the year, if not all of the year, and not have the pond drying out. Now we get on to this key issue which I've been talking about, which is protection. Protection from predators, from human disturbance, and from disease. Hunting and shooting issues is all part of this, and what we have really are big problems in being able to understand hunting and shooting, because they're totally complementary. And it's very important people realise you can't have shooting without using hounds to follow up any wounded animals. When you're shooting game, you need to be able to follow up any animal that isn't killed instantly very quickly. Shooting with shotguns on game, you average about 3 pellets per animal. The kills are quite good, but you have to have that picking up operation as the birds are being shot. And I've said here, honesty on wounding is still unresolved by the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, the Countryside Alliance, the European Federation of Associations for Hunting and Conservation. The reason was a wounding deal was struck with Elliot Morley by Basque and between Basque and the Countryside Alliance, and left an internal matter with face. And they decided not to raise the issue of wounding in any argument for hunting or against shooting. How on earth can you get the right legislation and provide the right evidence if people make those kind of crazy deals? Now, these are the primary factors in dealing with dispatching animals. Primary factors in establishing humaneness, minimising cruelty, eliminating unnecessary suffering, and removing sick, diseased, injured and wounded, namely deer, fox, hare, mink, squirrel, badger, rabbit, and many others abroad. We need the ability to move and disperse, inspect and locate specific individuals or species. A careful selection of an individual within the target species before culling. Survival of the fittest on being tested by scent hounds or specifically brought to bay. Selective as opposed to non-selective or indiscriminate killing is a moral principle reinforced under international law. Culling has a clear definition. We want to be able to ensure that we have instantaneous death or the best prospect of an instantaneous death, achieve no or low wounding rates, and the provision of a clean quality carcass, bled out as soon as methods allow. The ability to quickly follow up wounded or casualty animals for humane dispatch. Rapid availability of an efficient professional casualty service for key species, dealing with road traffic accidents promptly, and allowing veterinary inspection. 70,000 road traffic accidents involving deer, 20,000 deer going off injured or wounded and not being followed up properly. Management of species by rural communities to ensure the survival of well-dispersed, healthy animals in balance with other species. The need for full health inspections are a growing requirement, together with protection from human disturbance and to lower the risk of disease when and where appropriate. And the last point of these 10 points is maximisation of the economic benefits of the species management activities. The 3 deer hunts in the West Country put £10 million each year into the rural economy. Think about 300 hunts right the way through the country. It's a massive contribution to the rural economy, and they should be allowed to do their wildlife management jobs and tasks far more efficiently than they're allowed to do it now. Particular note, under the Deer Initiative Code of Practice, and Elliot Morley was a driver in saving the Deer Initiative, and it was his little baby in terms of getting something going on the deer problems. And under the Deer Initiative Code of Good Practice, all deer shot at must be followed up. This is not practical with badgers, or very rarely carried out for deer, except when a professional scent-hound casualty service is available in the area. The point Elliot Morley missed was that there is such a thing as wounding, and that wounded animals, injured animals, sick animals need to be found and followed up and dispatched, just to curtail any suffering. And that point was completely missed at the time of the Hunting Act, which was a tragedy. So these 10 factors above are key features of hunting methods, nearly always absent in the stalking or shooting of the above species. Indiscriminate slaughter by undisciplined mass shooting and poaching is now causing population collapses, particularly the red deer, requiring all shooting to be supervised by local wildlife managers, harbourers, acting for land custodians and communities. This is the RSPCA's preferred method of fox control. This vixen, nursing vixen with cubs, found in Hertfordshire by a hunt, has taken a wounding rifle shot in a central memory gland, as you can see in the middle there, and she's died of the wounds. Independent research has shown unacceptable levels of wounding with both rifles and shotguns, and clear evidence that the largest percentage of fox shooting outside specialist gun packs is conducted without an effective means of following up a wounded animal. Cambridge University research shows that most foxes are shot in February and March when vixens are pregnant and nursing. As a result, fox cubs are left to starve to death. That was of concern to the Scottish Society, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Scotland, who I met with and agreed that they would extend terrier work to deal with the starving fox cub problem, but not the RSPCA, who lied to the Burns inquiry on the wounding issue. And Elliot Morley claimed there was no such issue as a wounding issue or wounding problem. Another quote, and I must give you these quotes because we have to get to the bottom of our current problems. Because hunters are such a small and reviled number, it is their tactic to try and link the sports of shooting and fishing with theirs and scare participants in these pastimes into thinking that Labour will ban hunting, shooting and fishing. This is completely untrue. It is not and never has been our intention to prohibit responsible shooting and angling. Elliot Morley, Labour Animal Welfare Brief, 1994. I was advising a Labour Party at that time and was passed that brief. Labour believes in working with interested organisations such as the British Association for Shooting and Conservation and the Game Conservancy in developing best codes of practice for game management, shooting and conservation. What you can see here is a classic Stalinist divide and rule, setting hunting against shooting. And Elliot Morley was a past master at these Stalinist tactics. Now this problem is all resolved. It's all history with the welfare equations. And this is, for example, the red deer welfare equation, comparing suffering between hunting and stalking methods. The extent of the poor welfare can be multiplied by the duration of poor welfare as an estimate of the severity of the problem. Broom and Johnson, 1993, Stress and Animal Welfare. The leading advisor, William Swan of the RSPCA, has set out exactly the same basic principles, that we can produce a welfare equation to make decisions on what are the humane ways of dealing with wildlife. And I hope that will be put in practice as soon as possible. In terms of deer hunting, the summary here, simple solution. Hunting is more humane than stalking by a factor of at least 10 on culling comparisons, before the figures are weighted for the duration of all suffering curtailed by hunting methods, such as the casualty services, the communal control of the management activities through the deer management group support and cooperation, and the following important factors are not included above: degree of suffering, ethics of instantaneous death, importance of selectivity, realistic average wounding rates, ethics of sporting chance and clean carcass, length and time all body shot deer take to die, and of the welfare cost of stalking as a proven noxious stimulant on deer welfare. It's research by Batchelor in 1993. And that figure of hunting being more humane than stalking of 10 is based on a 5% walking wounded rate. In reality, the average wounded rate is 15. Rifle wounding, left. A bullet is entered behind the ear and exited through the mouth. The stag was alive for several days, found and dispatched by the Devon and Somerset staghounds. Right. a hind found lying out of the wind by a hedge near Mulland in Devon, February 2001 in freezing weather. A soft-nosed rifle bullet passed through the right nostril, smashing the roof of the mouth and both top and bottom jaws. Alive for at least 3 days. And I've said walking wounded rates for deer and badgers are now confirmed to be 15%. This is a survey which was withheld until after the Hunting Act was passed, of permanent wound tracks in the carcasses of culled wild deer in Scotland. And you can see here that the shots reaching the recommended target area 6, which is the heart-lung area, is 17.9%. And what you're doing in killing an animal, and you're advised not to take headshots because you get those terrible problems which you've seen. The advice is to go into the engine room, fire at the engine room between the heart and the lungs. And that is the recommended place to put a bullet. And that often leads for the deer's heart to carry on. If the heart isn't actually hit, it can carry on pumping for as much as 7 or 8 minutes or even more. And what actually happens to the animal if you're firing between the lungs and the heart, the animal is choking on its own blood. That's how it actually dies. So we really have quite difficult problems in making sure we get an instantaneous death. And obviously the most effective instantaneous death is by using a close-range headshot, as you would do if you were, RSPCA would do to an animal. And this is the only way that we really get a good instantaneous death. Or better still, cut the jugular vein so that the animal bleeds out and you have valuable meat, which is the traditional way and much the kindest way if you are able to avoid all the stress hormones generated by things like stunning. Predator-prey imbalances. Very interesting list of numbers here. Magpie up 97%, carrion crow up 89%, jackdaw up 107%, songbirds, corn bunting down 90%, yellow wagtail down 72%, skylark down 58%, yellowhammer down 55%, linnet down 55%. That's the figures over one generation from songbird survival, and the Patrick Foundation are on the right, more difficult, but these are estimates and realistic. Badgers up by at least 150%, in some areas 20 times as many badgers. Foxes up 40%. Common raptors up 100%, that's a very low figure. Squirrels up 100%. Seagulls up 140%. Big problem now, seagulls everywhere. Mink still up, not being properly controlled. Otters up 100%, causing major problems in our fisheries because they've been so successful. Pine marten being released in the Eland Valley. That's a real problem, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. Fish down 100%. I tell the story of 2 Belgians who heard that fishing on the Wye was the best in the world, so they booked in a hotel last year to go fishing on the Wye, spent a week, and they didn't catch any fish, but they saw lots of otters. That's the state of one of the greatest areas for fishing that this country's ever had and the world's ever had, apart from Scotland. That's one of the things we do really well, or did do in the past. They've now been ruined. River life is down 100%. On some of the tributaries of the Wye, the first time in living memory we have no young fish last autumn. Snakes and lizards down, frogs and toads down, insects down, bees down, bats down. We don't know enough, but we do know that those figures that we're looking at here are totally realistic, and there's only one answer, and that is wildlife management and predator control, and getting a balance between predator and prey. Lapwing is the most endangered bird in the country. Lapwing predation is as high as an unsustainable 84% on the research carried out by the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust in the Tess Valley. A new organisation against the RSPB, You Forgot the Birds campaign, reported that lapwings breed away merrily, but not at the RSPB sanctuary in Kent, where only 8 chicks successfully fledged. As I say, without compulsory predator control, lapwings and many other endangered species will soon disappear. Now look at that. We all want to put up bird boxes and think we've done a wonderful job and go away. Some 60 bird boxes on the Eland Valley estate in mid-Wales have received attention from uncontrolled squirrels and maybe newly introduced pine marten. who find easily obtained meal at these locations. They know when the birds are going in, there's a food source there, so they just open up the box and go in. Although pine martins much prefer lamb, so they're the great lamb killers, and of course not popular if you want to have sheep as well. Other serious problems to be resolved. Ticks. Ticks are ectoparasites living by hematophagy on the blood of mammals, birds and sometimes reptiles and amphibians. If you've got blood, the ticks will get you. Tick-borne illnesses are caused by infection with a variety of pathogens. In other words, within the blood they can harbour more than one disease-causing agent. Patients can be infected with more than one pathogen at the same time, compounding the difficulty in diagnosis and treatment. The major tick-borne diseases include Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, relapsing fever, tularemia, tick-borne, I can't pronounce it, but it's a very long and it sounds horrible, Colorado tick fever, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, babesiosis and cytoxinosis. Wow. Now the point I'm making here is that with the possible explanation of widespread DDT use in Soviet Union, attempts to limit the population or distribution of disease-causing ticks have been very unsuccessful. This is a major problem. Both sides of this stoat's head were covered in ticks. Both sides of the head. You see where it's been through the undergrowth and picking up the ticks. As a warm-blooded animal, that's what the ticks do, climb aboard. This is the pattern for all warm-blooded animals, including humans, where ticks are now commonplace. So any ground-nesting bird, their chicks, any animal living in the grass, moving in the grass where the ticks are, is going to pick this up. A lot of people take their dogs out for a 1-hour walk and come back with 30 or 40 ticks. Even 2 or 3 ticks is bad enough. And this is the seriousness of this particular problem and the effect it has, the unseen effect it has on so many of our wildlife species. Bracken and unpalatable wheatgrasses are host to ticks, which spread Lyme disease and looping ill to humans, together with seriously infesting and killing wildlife populations and lambs. I've seen lambs killed by ticks and tick infestations. In 1971 there were no ticks reported on Exmoor, and now they are being found in areas of Britain where they've never been seen before, such as Snowdon. On a guided tour of southeast Dartmoor in July, the guide reported that he personally knew 7 people who had contracted Lyme disease. 2 weeks later I met a man whose dog had contracted Lyme disease. When sheep were treated each year in September with the dieldrin insecticide-based sheep dip, the tick population was contained and managed. Great care was required to ensure that the dipped sheep stood on a concrete apron to allow surplus liquid to drain from their short fleeces back into the tank. Now this is several weeks after they've been shorn, and there are short fleeces there for the dieldrin insecticide to come onto the animal. And of course the liquid goes back into the tank and you don't waste it. This method not only dealt with the autumn peak in ticks, but allowed residual insecticide to stay in the wool, giving protection from the spring flush. In Scotland, where 50% of the sheep have been removed, land custodians now pay farmers to bring sheep onto their land so a degree of tick control can be put in place. However, dieldrin was banned by the Labour government without a suitable substitute being made available. Out-of-control ticks now represent a more serious problem than bovine TB, which in fact can be easily resolved. Large swathes of the uplands now infested with ticks are in consequence no-go areas for people because of the risk of tick infestations. The replacement treatment for ticks is spraying every 6 weeks, which makes an enormous expense for the farmers, and it isn't really effective. So this tick insecticide issue has got to be dealt with very urgently. Heather beetle. There's the adult heather beetle, and you can see the size on the hand of the man who's in charge of the heather trust, Simon Full. This in fact is not as serious a problem as obviously TB and ticks, but it's been a major issue while we've had warmer and wetter weather. Recent mild, wet winters and wet summers have produced severe heather beetle problems, and the damage that this causes to heather is a periodic worry to landowners and conservation organisations. This dark brown beetle hibernates throughout the winter below the surface on the moors and emerges in spring as temperatures rises. It feeds lightly on heather, mates, lays eggs on the damp area of ground, particularly sphagnum moss, and then dies. By late May the eggs hatch into grubs, which are greenish, yellow with black spots and 12 millimetres long. They invade the heather plants, eating young shoots and damaging stems, with the result that the heather turns a foxy red colour by July, before dying and going completely grey by the following spring. Seedlings and old heather are especially vulnerable to attack, leaving only young, vigorous growing heather capable of surviving. Because of this, the most carefully managed moors with appropriate grazing and burning patterns will suffer the least damage. And back again to the importance of burning being a big help in reducing heather beetle problems. By early August, the grubs start to drop off the heather and bury into the litter to pupate into the adult beetle. This is heather under attack from heather beetle. As I say, the mild and wet weather around 2000 in particular led to serious heather beetle damage, which left dead plants and red colour in others. You can see those whitish colours there, they're completely dead. Now unfortunately this was wrongly blamed by the ecologists on overgrazing, and I heard constantly, oh, heather's been overgrazed, that's why it's looking like that. And it was another excuse to remove livestock from the hills, which was totally falsely based. Conclusion, and I'm using a Moorland Association quote again. They are the source of the best information on the management of heather moorland. They're the experts. Too much heather has been lost. The Moorland Association seeks to reverse that. Our members have already recovered over 160,000 acres that had become degraded, and much more is in hand. With the right policies, this could be restored to the 1.2 million acres of heather moorland that existed before 1939. This in turn would extend much further the massive environmental and biodiversity benefits that heather moorland management provides, to the advantage of everyone. Bracken. This is part of the 16,000 acre Abergwysin estate as it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. All that remains of the heather is just in front of us on the left. There's still some purple flower left, and there's some heather over on the right hand side. When I first went onto this moor, it was wonderful heather moorland as far as the eye could see, perfect for a triple SI site. Now you have massive areas of bracken, and you can see here where the mowing machine has been out cutting it down. Some of that bracken is as high as 9 feet tall. I think the record's about 10 or 11 feet. And of course it's very good agricultural land, effectively. That's why it grows such good heather. And this is a tragedy, and I have a little to say about this on the next slide. In 1997, this area of the National Trust 16,000 acre Abergwysin estate in mid Wales was well stocked and managed, producing quality heather as far as the eye could see. There was a small patch of remaining heather in the foreground left, and large stands of high bracken in the background, which are being cut down by machine. Sir Angus Stirling, famous leader of the National Trust, who upheld and praised the managers of this site of special scientific interest, would the current management neglect. Statutory powers exist requiring this land to be returned to its original SSI condition. I did raise this problem of bracken at the National Trust AGM, and it's there on the British Wildlife Management to see the questions raised and the answers given, and I'm sure that the National Trust will do all they can from now onwards to try and resolve this particular problem. One of the many catastrophic consequences of neglecting the removal of grazing animals being the spread of uncontrolled bracken. aided by warmer and wetter conditions over recent years. Still spreading, this now covers an area of at least 1.5 million hectares, twice the area of Lincolnshire, and approaching the national wheat crop of around 2 million hectares. Bracken is the sixth most common plant occurring throughout Britain. It's not only notoriously difficult to get rid of, but is dangerous both to animals and human beings, for it contains shemic acid, quercetin and cataclysm emulsion, all of which are cancer-producing agents or poisons. Currently, there are major concerns that these chemicals and other toxins spread from the bracken's leaves and extensive rhizome network below the surface are not only killing off plants which try to compete, but also allowing the same water-soluble chemicals and toxins to leach into the upland ground water supplies, which represent 70% of our drinking water. Infestations of useless bracken across the UK contaminate our rivers and water supplies. This plant is deciduous and not a plus carbon fixer for the believers in saving carbon. The roots do not store water in winter. These are the photographs taken by Pauline Greenwood, bracken impeding walkers at Biodiversity, Dartmoor. 5 feet high bracken surrounding the restored heather moorland in full purple flower centre right of this picture on the National Trust Howden Moor, managed by Jeff Eyre, taken in August when the bracken is reaching full height. This is now a common view across most of our potentially productive uplands approaching 2 million acres. Water supplies. This has to be mentioned. I heard the Environment Agency saying 5 or 6 years ago that of all the countries in Europe we had the worst situation regarding maintaining water supplies to the public because of lack of infrastructure over the past 50 years. Here we have the fact that 70% of the UK's drinking water comes from the uplands. Fresh and clean water will come under even greater pressure as our population continues to rise to a projected 70 million. Heather moorland areas with their low external inputs provide vast, clean, undeveloped catchments. Management of heather moorland has provided clean water in the face of years of industrial pollution. I've said until now, because if we've got all this bracken and taking over our heather moorlands, then we've got a massive issue here, which is another very serious issue to be dealt with. Carcinogens have been measured in water at levels as high as 45 micrograms per litre. The acceptable minimum is 0.005 to 0.016. Some water companies claim that treatment of their public water supplies removes this toxic hazard, but this is still unproven and cannot address the impact of untreated water used by humans, animals and wildlife, particularly aquatic life. Soil erosion and degradation. Erosion and landslides are common with the loss of grazing animals, which encourage healthy, deep-rooted grasses, more effective at holding the soil together and storing more water than tree plantations. This also applies to undergrazed peat. If you take the animals off, you don't stimulate the root growth, the grass then dies, and then you get this kind of erosion. They're plain to see, and there's lots of it to see where the animals have been taken off, and we've got this problem. Burning, and I'm going to do a summary on burning. Careful, regular burning of ungrazed, rank, unpalatable grasses triggers the nitrogen-potash cycle, activates seeds, removes pests, and provides a new start for productive plants. Lime application to correct soil acidity normally follows this process. If careful burning is not carried out, there is a major risk of uncontrolled fires, which can cause enormous long-term damage to peat adjoining woodland and crops. We've seen this in the last 30 years. We've had 1 or 2 years which have been disastrous in the number of serious fires which have done enormous damage. Take, for example, the massive fire that took place on the moorland around Flyingdales up in Yorkshire. Now I'm going to deal with my pet subject, badgers. And I've gone into some detail here because it's essential to get the truth about badgers out to the public, because TB is such a serious problem. There are 79 countries in the world where TB has mutated, and TB in people cannot even be treated because of the mutations we're now seeing. We should have zero tolerance for TB. And I'm just going to go through some of the background issues to show you that there's been a war here between the animal rights industry, who profit from subscriptions from people who think that the badgers should be saved, and the people who wish to manage the countryside for you, I, and all those people who visit the countryside. And these are clear comments. We're back to Elliot Morley again. Labour intends to strengthen the existing legislation to further protect badgers and their sets. The second, most important evidence. The TB99 disease investigation report completed by experienced veterinary officers for every outbreak and analysis of these from 1986 to 1995 by the epidemiology unit at Weybridge found 90% of new herd incidents were considered badger origin. 90%. This is from the best state veterinary service in the world over that period of time. And you'll see they were excluded, and this evidence was excluded from a Labour government's committee in investigating badgers and TB. Key point. Please see the attached documents, in particular the British Cattle Veterinary Association Killarney report by Gallagher and Sainsbury, among the important key evidence excluded by the independent scientific group commissioned by the Labour government to delay badger culling. TB has long been proven to be an endemic bacterial disease of the badger and not a cattle disease by specific research in 1976, 1955 and 1935. TB has long been proven to be an endemic bacterial disease of the badger, apart from those 3 dates and the Central Scientific Laboratory TB report in July 2004. Protecting the badger and stopping the selective dispatch of sick badgers will cost the taxpayer unnecessarily over £3 billion. The Labour Party profits from the organised crime of the animal rights campaigns, and DEFRA participates willingly. Here is a picture to show you the badger and the cow. And it's the old sick badgers. They're driven out of the set by the younger badgers that go to the farms for shelter, for food, for water, and pee or breathe on or excrete on grass which the cattle are eating. They are the carriers of the disease. This is the Veterinary Association for Wildlife Management. Number of cattle slaughtered because of uncontrolled infected badgers. The Conservative government instigated the Krebs report, and Krebs was going to tell us the best way to control badgers, and in effect we've had no culling until recently, and that is the escalation of the numbers of healthy cattle slaughtered. They simply react to a skin test. They're perfectly healthy otherwise, and they're perfectly good to eat. Just a skin test. And cattle cover that reaction. Badgers don't. Different reaction. And this is what I heard in the audience from the first ever public ISG, Independent Scientific Group meeting in November 2003, after 64 closed meetings and an expenditure of 45 million. We have no evidence of endemic TB in badgers, Professor John Bourne. That was a blatant lie. This is another very important statement very recently in December 2013. Bovine tuberculosis, BTB, is a very important disease of cattle in Britain, where it has been increasing in incidence and geographical distribution. In addition to cattle, it infects other species of domestic and wild animals, in particular the European badger, Meles meles. And this report is called A Restatement of the Natural Science Evidence Base Relevant to the Control of Bovine Tuberculosis in Great Britain, published by the Royal Society. Godfrey, Donnelly, Carr, MacDonald et al. This disgraceful paper flies in the face of well-established evidence that BTB is a badger disease, verified by searching 189 papers on Google referring to TB in badgers being endemic, and the Gallagher and Sainsbury paper. And this is part of that paper. Badgers found with generalised terminal disease usually become recuperate excretors, causing massive contamination, and it is these that are more likely to be the source of large numbers of multiple reactors. Annual and often more frequent testing in TB problem areas results in repeated removal of cattle reactors in the early stages of infection before they present a risk to others. But a self-perpetuating reservoir of TB infection in badgers has long been recognised, Gallagher et al. 1976, in which disease in the badger can progress to emaciation and death. It's very unlikely that cattle will pass TB on to other cattle, and the cattle are getting it from the badgers. However, the pathology differs fundamentally from that in cattle. The infected badger shows a brief period of low-grade hypersensitivity before developing an allergic type of reaction associated with considerably larger bacillary numbers than are seen in hypersensitive cattle. Also, it commonly exhibits more opportunities for excretion, not only from contaminated sputum and feces, but also from urine and discharging bite wound abscesses. In the badger, the kidney is the most frequent site of spread following generalization, and counts equivalent to 5 times 10 to the value of 6 bacteria have been recorded in a full urination of an advanced case. 1.5 million bacteria and a teaspoonful of urine for you, for people to work it out for themselves. This represents a potentially massive contamination of pasture, and together with contaminated sputum where badgers have been foraging for worms, these discharges present a real source of infection for other animals using that pasture. The British Cattle Veterinary Association Killarney Conference report, TB, Do We Have a Control Policy? Gallagher and Sainsbury, and that can be read on the British Wildlife Management website. That evidence and all the other evidence from a best state veterinary service in the world has been excluded from the Labour government's work on this, and even recent government. One badger soon becomes 11. Surveys of badger numbers show a massive increase in numbers and predation damage. And here, I'm afraid to say, it's very sad, but I have to put this kind of material into the public domain, but it's my only way of getting the truth to where it matters. And this is the proof of misconduct in public office. Professor John Bourne, Monday the 18th of June 2007, a Select Committee on Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Examination of Witnesses, questions 60 to 79, minutes of evidence. Parliament should have dealt with it, but like so many things, Parliament doesn't, especially when they have committees composed of both Labour and Conservatives. Professor John Bourne, chairman of the Independent Scientific Group, stated, "Let us go back to 1999 when we started our work. It was made very clear to us by ministers of the day, and they have not refuted it since, that elimination of badgers over large tracts of countryside was not an option for future policy. It was on that basis that we designed the trial. We also had to take into account welfare considerations with respect to culling used and limitations on culling with respect to cubs that were not killed or died underground. Those were clear political limitations that we operated under. I have no reason to believe that those political limitations have changed. We repeatedly say, culling as conducted in the trial. It is important that we do say that. Those limitations were not imposed by ourselves, they were imposed by politicians. Whatever has driven that, I do not know, but the fact is that a price has been put on the badger in this country which related to the way we were able to carry out our scientific work. That is exactly what we report. And my comment here on this, and having gone to all the meetings and followed this whole trail, disastrous trail in my opinion, what had driven limitations imposed by politicians was the initial 1.1 million donation to Labour and other animal rights industry funds collected mainly from vegetarians. So there was a very much a campaign, if you like, through these various organisations in the Labour Party to make sure that badgers were not culled. I put a conclusion here. It should not be a surprise that those with good knowledge of the past roles of Elliot Morley and Barbara Young in the RSPB and in government, that DEFRA and Natural England are still dominated by Labour Party activists and EU supporters. Their hostile agenda against landowners, wildlife managers, upland farmers, commoners and graziers in key parts of the British agricultural sector, including the Somerset levels, has delivered catastrophic results and record levels of farmer suicides. Now, I always give a solution, and I complain, I always give a solution. And there always was a simple solution to the badger situation. And if the people involved in government, before they wasted £3 billion of money, should have spoken to the country people who understand these issues. Of course they didn't. Super excretors, along with other old sick badgers, are driven out of the setts and badger territory by the younger dominant badgers, leaving them with no alternative but to seek food, water and shelter near farms and livestock. These sick animals, some of whom will carry 1.5 million bacteria in a teaspoonful of urine, were proven by the State Veterinary Service in 1985 to 96 to be directly responsible for TB in cattle in 90% of new herd infections, not the 6% dishonestly claimed by Labour in the more recent House of Commons debate. Badger baiting, deceitfully confused with baying by the animal rights industry, has never been proven to be part of modern working terrier practice. Despite continuing requests for evidence of baiting, none has been produced by the Labour Party charities RSPCA, LACS, Badger Trust or the National Wildlife Crime Unit. And I've been on the Partnership Against Wildlife Crime. I've been going to their annual seminar since inception until the last year when I was told that I wasn't welcome. Simple solution at no or low cost. The selective, humane and effective all-year-round management of the badger population, as developed over more than 300 years and perfected by the National Working Terrier Federation, who operate legally on fox control at the earth nationally. Free traditional best practice through licensing existing specialists who will concentrate on the searching by scent, locating and dispatch with a close-range headshot the sick super excretors together with old weak badgers. The use of a trained dog to follow a scent trail with the aim of locating, without physically coming in contact with, an injured badger does not require a licence and can be carried out under an exemption provided in the Hunting Act. In this way, bovine TB can be brought under control in 3 years, a little more. The licensed local badger managers with full knowledge of fox earths and badger sets in their area would also be required to identify infected sets using the PCR test, which works and is being used in Europe, and apply in situ euthanasia using an approved anaesthetic such as carbon dioxide, which is heavy enough to sink to the bottom of the deep sets and provides no after effects if the badger receives a non-lethal dose. Now, what do the RSPCA and the Badger Trust members really think about sick badgers? I'll tell you. The RSPCA, including Director Gavin Grant, at a recent public Badger Cull meeting, following my question, have confirmed that searching for, locating and dispatching sick super excretor badgers with a close-range headshot would not be successfully prosecuted. So what's the fuss? What's the big argument? On Friday the 29th of August 2014 in South Wales, at the Badger Trust AGM, Chief Veterinary Officer of Wales, Christiane Glossop, and I was in attendance, asked the audience if they would support the humane dispatch of sick badgers. It was a massive show of hands. So all the people who are paying this money into these various organisations will be very happy to see animals dispatched in the most humane way. And we could have done this years ago. Badger summary. There is little point in investing in red meat production in the uplands, even remotely detached from the current spread of bovine TB, until this dreadful bacterial disease is brought under control. In other words, forget the uplands, forget the cattle. if we can't get the TB under control quickly. The independent expert panel report conclusions, now available for scrutiny by the public, on the flawed concept of shooting badgers with a rifle from a distance were predictable, with walking wounded rates around 15% and cost per badger over £4,000 each. Very few sick badgers were identified. This was a plan engineered by DEFRA to ensure that protecting the diseased badger would be continued in order to meet Labour Party obligations to the very well organised animal rights industry, who funded them by at least £2 million. DEFRA are in control of policy. Vaccination at a cost of £3,000 over 5 years for each badger does not work and will not work. Another red herring. Now I'll just run through the first steps. If all these other problems are dealt with by government, the first steps are restoring the uplands as carried out on Howden Moor. Track vehicle used from the start of the project. The sprayer applies least toxic salt-based sprays and seeds with a cutter bar on front to harvest seeds. With the sprayer removed, equipment and people can be carried. And that's a very soft footprint. Doesn't make much of a problem when it's turning on peat. It's the ideal vehicle for the job. Wheatgrasses and bracken sprayed and burnt. They all obviously die, and the salt-based sprays actually start killing the plant off at the roots, so it kills the roots of the grass, which is crucial. And then it's just a plant that can be burnt very easily and totally destroyed. Burnt 8 weeks later in a traditional patchwork, leaving the bare ground on which to apply seeds. And you see all the patches there and the way that's been dealt with. And now they create a wonderful mosaic of heather for all manner of species that love the heather and the uplands. Harvesting heather seed, the moor in the background. You can see quite a lot of work that's been done in the background there. In this image we can see what is called weed wiping of very healthy bracken on otherwise very productive farmland. And the weed wiping is by brushes, and it literally wipes the plant with the chemical. There are sheep grazing successfully on land that's been reclaimed, with lots of heather in the foreground, lots of wonderful heather in the background. A mosaic of ideal habitat for a whole range of species, including the harvest of a surplus of grass which pays the bills. Once all useless, rank and unpalatable millennia grass on Howden Moor. Just look at the scenery and patchwork. And within that patchwork you can have almost anything you want in terms of landscaping the ideal area for wildlife and livestock. That was the species counts in 93 and in 2004. And I talk in general terms about a 10 times increase. It was actually a lot more than that on many of the species. So a fantastic change by just providing a right habitat and management, good wildlife management. Now I'm coming to the end of the talk, and we have to deal with the most important endangered species now. Saving our endangered human species. Before the last upland farmers, graziers and commoners disappeared, unable to survive on the welfare provided, as inadequate compensation for the willful destruction of their businesses by DEFRA, Natural England, Natural Resources Wales, National Park Authorities, etc., the state must be made to recognise the deliberate, devastating impacts they have inflicted upon some 50% of the land area of Britain. 80% of Welsh farmers are now said to be in less favoured or severely disadvantaged areas. The average hill farmer earns £2.50 per hour for an 80-hour week. The consumers pay for their food twice, once in subsidies which go in welfare payments to farmers from taxes, and secondly payments for farm products. Heavily subsidised food from around the world is allowed to be dumped on our markets, thereby distorting fair and consistent farm gate prices. Planting trees. I've come to trees last for various reasons. We're talking about land generally on which trees can't be planted and shouldn't be planted. And there are always many opportunities for small plantations on any well-run upland, moorland managed operation, and these can be seen in practice. As proved above, the new technologies of reseeding suitable palatable grasses such as briar, heather and other plants will allow a tenfold increase in the carrying capacity for wildlife and a better balance of hardy sheep and cattle all year round in the uplands. The consequent increased root growth is proven to provide far greater capacity for water than woodland, as well as reducing soil erosion to the minimum and increasing soil fertility under good management, contrary to the claims made by wilding supporters. In reality, we cannot properly manage our existing woodlands or afford vast new forestry schemes without a viable and profitable upland countryside. Required actions. Simple solutions. The state imposition of a misguided, one-size-fits-all national plan imposed by compulsion under threat of loss of subsidies by the decisions of semi-skilled academic advisors who represent a significant unnecessary overhead cost, has delivered a massive environmental, ecological, agricultural and social cataclysm. DEFRA, Natural England, Natural Resources Wales and Scottish National Heritage, advised by the RSPB, together with the National Trust, must accept collective responsibility and immediately allow the simple solutions outlined in this presentation to be put in place. Above all, our international obligations to achieve biodiversity targets and meet the demands of growing world markets for the production of quality grass to meat products speaks for itself for the future of the world's peoples and this country. I'm suggesting a proposed new supervisory body, just simply reforming what we have. The forests, uplands and woodlands of the British Isles require the highest standards of management best practice for all the species which can thrive in and around them over the longer term for the full benefit of future generations. The failed political proposal of selling forests to the highest bidder ignores the need for the long-term planning and stability of all potential and associated benefits, including substantial quality job creation and the wide range of managed access opportunities. A state-led and private sector-run wildlife management and forest service, encompassing agriculture, fisheries and food, could re-establish Britain as a world leader in the twin roles of environmental management and food production at half current costs. This should be combined with a new ambitious national jobs and skills service. Modern techniques and mechanisation can bring back the best results of the past and be highly productive economically, requiring the implementation of best private sector practice as soon as possible and the removal of negative forces. Key recommendations following exit from the EU. Reform the Charities Commission and the police to allow them to restore former high standards disconnected from politics and establish new professional reputations for those involved, worthy of a great and good country fighting crime. Secure markets from all relevant sources for income and profit. Compulsory predator control, fully engaging with the free services provided by the self-regulated private wildlife management sector, starting with bovine TB, tick, bracken and weedgrass eradication proposals. Agronomists to be fully involved in the long-term national planning and efficiency of individual countryside schemes. Headage payments to bring rapid recovery in stock numbers. Currency loss compensation and generous tax incentives for the required capital improvements. Thank you.